Thanks for joining us today on The Perfect X. My name is Sherry, and this is my co-host, Leigh.
Hello.
And today we are talking about TMI, too
Too
much
many informations.
information. Yeah. I was just gonna say, unless you're old, too old to know what TMI is. I was gonna say
Yeah,
it, but
I don't know what.
yeah,
Too many informations.
too many. And this is really interesting because I know you haven't obviously dated online, but you would be shocked what people share. And I have a big mouth, but even I try not to overshare because I mean, the reality is like when you're just getting to know someone, everything they say will determine whether you will or continue to talk to them online or go on another date with them. So I think this is a really important topic.
Yeah, I think for like I'm sort of the same as you. Like I always try to like gauge how much I need to share. Cause like sometimes people glance over something important, and you're like, hold on, what was that about? But then me, I like go into every detail about every like my dad and I both do it. Like if we're talking about like fixing something, like we're like, oh, this happened, and then I'd do this, and it's like get to the point, you know. But it's such a as most things, I think it's a balancing act because if you glaze over stuff, it's like seems like you're being omitting it deliberately. But then
Deceitful.
if you go into too much detail, it's not necessary either, right?
I know, and that's actually really interesting because I always like pride myself in being as honest as I possibly can.
Hmm.
So it's exactly it. It's like if you don't share enough, if you omit things, you're deceitful. But then at the same time, it's like I don't want to say something that, which in reality, it is this way. Like if you get to know someone, you may be okay with certain things that beforehand you may not be okay with, and you don't aren't interested in someone. You're like, I would never date someone who's like has these three things.
Hmm.
But as you get to know someone, you fall for them, and then maybe later they share it with you. You're like, actually, I like them so much I can overlook it.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I think that's a
but
big
at this,
thing.
but you're right though. It is like at the same time you're like, but am I lying or
No, my biggest thing is just um, you know, it's I just have a hard time like gauging like how much information is the right amount to give someone because some people like they're like they feel like you've left them like with not enough information, and then other times they're like, yeah, I know, I get it, right? So I'm always struggling with that line, just in general, like not just like obviously in the dating or relationship aspect, but even just in like general
in
life, like
general?
I'm trying to explain what's going on with an issue or something, and I'm like, how far in depth do I go here? And you try to not mansplain things to people, right? You want to be like
Yeah.
assume that they know, but then it's such a I have it every day at work because my part of my job is like explaining things, and I'm like I don't want to seem patronizing and break it down too far, but then if I kind of don't break it down enough, they feel like I'm not being forthcoming, right? So I can see
No,
how
it's
that would
true.
spill over into the dating life.
It's true. It's like that in general with all relationships. Like, for
Hmm.
instance, you may do something that would never bother me because I've known you for like 20 years and it doesn't even sort of phase me.
Yeah.
And someone new in my life will do the exact same thing and it would like be such a red flag, you know?
Yeah.
But so that's the problem. It's like you have to gauge when do you share certain things, when do you not share certain things,
Yeah.
but, you know, because in reality, people as they get to know you will be okay with some things, but at the same time, like there are certain things that if you don't share, then someone might be like, well, fuck, So it's a
Yeah.
great topic. And I kind of broke it down like this. Like this is, I mean, maybe wrong, but I feel like if someone is asking you something, then it's not TMI. Like if you're
Right.
specifically asking a question. So like
Hmm.
even when you come, like I can't get mad at you for if I ask you how to like fix a tool and you over explain, if I'm
Yeah.
asking you how to, because maybe that's just how you speak and you are an over explainer. So it's not mansplaining. It's not like you think I'm an idiot, but I did ask
Right.
you, right? And
Yeah.
I kind of see that same with people, but then we really do as adults have to learn to self gauge. That's the reality. Like
Hmm.
if I ask someone about past relationships, I think sharing the basics is what people are usually looking for. Like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
know, right? Like I know I like to know, like I always ask like when was your last girlfriend? I'll ask a guy. I only
Yeah.
just want to know like was it last week? Because I'm not
Right.
interested in, you know.
Yeah,
But
I
if
think
it's like a
that's right. If you can give them the Coles notes, and then if they have follow up questions, then you can go in deeper.
exactly. Like just give the basics. Like I think like sharing like, oh, my last girlfriend was like 6 months ago. And then I can check off like, okay, he is like safe enough to date. Maybe that's
Yeah.
what I'm just asking.
Yeah. It
But
wasn't
then I
last
may
week.
say like,
Yeah.
exactly. Like people are usually trying to gauge the basics, you know? I think that's a fair assumption.
Yeah.
Um, and then like another thing is, you know, they may ask like, why did you break up? You can just say like, oh, you know, we weren't compatible or we started to argue a lot. We didn't see things the same. You don't need to go into like great fucking detail of what you fought about. Like,
Right.
you know?
Yeah, and if that person feels a need to ask certain questions, you can. But I think, yeah, for sure, in like the dating world, I think there's probably the resume type. Just give me the broad strokes, and then if there's a particular thing that is interesting, you could come back to that and ask more questions.
Yeah. Yeah. Like for instance, maybe he could say it if he was like, oh, she wants kids or she wants to get married and I don't. I think then if I also like have marriage like on my brain and I really want to get married sometime soon, then it
Hmm.
might be fair for me to ask, oh, okay, like, well, do you ever want to get married? Like those are fair questions, but I'm not entitled to get into all of the
Yeah.
details of the
Well,
relationship.
they kind of opened that door when they said we broke up because I didn't want to get married or something. So you're like, okay, like, is that your position? Like, you still don't want to get married, or maybe you just didn't want to marry that person, or and that gives you an opportunity to ask more questions, I think. But then
But
instead of
but
you
you're
just
not
spilling
privy.
everything, yeah.
Yeah, you're not privy to the details. And I just recently went on a date with a guy, like not recently, like a couple months ago.
Hmm.
And he was like that. Like I kind of asked, like, oh, like were you married before? Because he was a lot older than me.
Hmm.
And he was like, yeah, I was. And then he went into like great fucking detail of how she cheated on him, how he caught her, how he even tracked her phone, like all these things I wasn't asking.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is TMI. Like, why aren't you gauging that we literally spent the 2 hours of the dinner breaking down his relationship? And I wasn't interested in that. And I did feel like that was TMI. I didn't ask follow up questions. Like, I did ask, like, oh, like, you know, like, oh, when did you get divorced or
Hmm.
that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I only asked that. And then he got into like okay, well, she cheated on me. Okay, fair. I didn't ask how we found out or what. I just said, I'm sorry to hear that. And he went into like, literally tracking her phone down and all it went on for like
Wow.
an hour and a bit. And I like gossip and I like the story, but I
Hmm.
was kind of like, I didn't go on a date to be a counselor for your past relationship, you
Yeah,
know?
that
Like,
just screams like they aren't over it or something. Like you gotta, like, if you say, hey, like, yeah, I was married and then this happened, and then if you ask like how it ended, you go, oh, she was cheating on me or whatever. Then you're like, okay, like, that's fine, and then that gives you an opportunity to ask more questions if you feel the need to.
and he honestly didn't owe an explanation to me. We should also put that in. Like, you don't owe someone on the first beginning of a relationship the explanation of your details. Like, he didn't owe me to tell me how he. I could have said like, oh, how did you find out? I probably did ask that. I feel like I would have, and he could have
Yeah.
said, oh, like I caught her. That's all he has to say.
Yeah.
He didn't owe me those details, and I wasn't asking really. Like, I think that people should generally think in the beginning that others are asking basics, not like the extreme details. And
Yeah.
you're only privy to the basics. Like I'm only privy, like I'm not actually privy to anything, but if, you know, he doesn't owe me the details of like phone tracking and that kind of shit.
Yeah.
Like he just can
Yeah.
say, I caught them and I could say, I'm sorry to hear that. Like,
I think you've got to treat it like a job interview almost, where you give them the broad strokes, and then if they have follow up questions, you can dig in further. But a lot of people just don't have social cues anyway. They
it
don't
is
pick up
true.
on social cues, I should say. Like, there's, like, I deal with all kinds of people, obviously, and you could be. We talk about this and like like you can see the guy's body language, like he has to get going or he's checking his phone or whatever. Some people are like, I'm pretty in tune with that type of thing, so I'll say, anyway, we'll pick this up later. But there are people have said to me, oh, there's other people that come around here and like they just don't get it. Like, we're literally like working, we're busy, we'll stop for a few minutes and then we got to get going. But they're like checking their phone and tapping their foot, and some people just don't pick up on social cues at all, and
Yeah.
I could see that being a problem if you were dating, especially like you know somewhat regularly, and you just suck with social cues. It could be challenging.
And actually, you kind of pointed it out in a really smart way. Like, it is like a job interview. Like, if you didn't get along with your old boss and you go to a job interview and you start talking about like what a piece of shit he was,
Yeah.
no matter what a piece of shit he was or wasn't, they're not going to hire you because you
No.
just show that that's how you communicate, and
Yeah.
that nobody wants someone that talks like that. Maybe you don't get along with this boss, so why would I hire you just so you can go talk shit about my company, you know?
Yeah. Well, you got to be like,
And
if you're how long did you work there? And they go, I was there for 5 years. That's the answer. You don't need to go any further, right? Like you just answer the immediate question and then let,
Or
like
or
that
if
kind
they
of
ask
thing.
like, well, why did you leave? You could just say there was like we had different views on opinions on how I want to move in the industry or how I want to work, or
Yeah.
like just share like the broad like me and the manager had different views on like what next steps for my career goals are. Like you don't need to
Yeah.
go into details into
I
because
think
it
this
does
this
come
spills
off.
over into every part of life though. Like there's just some people that just don't have good social cues, or they don't know when's enough. You've said enough, And I think that those people probably have that same struggle in every part of their life. If you're going on a date, I would encourage someone to think like that in like the short answers at first, and give the person an opportunity to ask more questions. Even whoever I'm talking to, I always try to like reciprocate questions as best I can, because some people are pretty good about asking questions and they kind of get me going. And I'm like, well,
Mm-hmm.
what about you? What's new with you? Right. And I do have to sort of remind myself to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And it does,
I have that
it
same
works though.
problem.
Like I know a lot of people do ask me, what's new? How's the kid? How's this? How's that? And I could talk for half an hour, but I do try to give them the short and sweet, and it's kind of try and reciprocate back and forth, and make sure I ask as many questions as they're asking of me. And, ballpark, right? I just try to make it not such a one-sided conversation.
I totally agree with you, and I love people who are aware of that because I have the same problem. Like I know that I go into detail with stuff with my people I'm close with.
Yeah.
So I do the same thing. I'm like I make sure to like bring the questions back, and it's so noticeable. Like even amongst friends, like I have friends that never ask. You ask them stuff. Like
Hmm.
I recently just hung out with a friend of mine, and she like we asked so much about her and her stuff, and she never reciprocated. And literally the whole dinner was just 3 hours of her talking, which was fine. I don't mind. We were catching up, but she never once reciprocated the
Yeah.
questions back.
Yeah.
And you do walk away feeling like, oh, they're kind of selfish. And maybe they're not. Maybe like they're like us. Like they are two TMI people and they can overshare, but you do need to be self aware and ask back because people aren't interested in further connecting with selfish individuals. And that's how that's perceived. It's perceived when you don't ask it back.
Yeah, and I think obviously with everything we talk about on the podcast, I think it's like the general, like down the middle thing. Like if somebody, if you get together with someone and there's a big event in their life, obviously they're going to talk more than it wouldn't be 50-50. Most likely you're getting together to find out what's going on. But I think with us and a lot of the stuff we talk about, it's like we're kind of talking like general situations, not
Yeah.
outlying
Yeah.
situations that are, extenuating circumstances. Like if you're just generally meeting up to catch up, it should be as much back and forth 50-50, I think, as possible.
Yeah. It's true. It's
But if
true.
you win the lottery and you're like, hey, let's go for coffee, like I expect like it's going to be a bit one sided, right? Then that's fine.
What is it? I know that is true. Or if you just got divorced and you just want to talk about it. No, I get it. I get it.
Yeah, yeah, but then don't
Yeah.
be one of those people. Yeah, so if you're in a dating environment, I think you just got to make that conscious decision or conscious effort to reciprocate with the questions and sort of keep your answers on topic, and then make sure I always try to basically ask the same questions they ask of me. How are you?
Yeah.
I'm great. How are you? How's the kids? Not bad. How's your kids? Like, just as a rule of thumb, like, and then it'll take conversation will carry where it goes. But it's good if someone cares enough to ask me like how my wife is. I'm gonna make an effort to ask how their wife or husband is. Right. I think that's just a good rule of thumb. You try and reciprocate as best you can.
You know what's really interesting though, like to go back to that guy I went out with, and he went on for like an hour and a bit about his ex-wife, and then also like his last relationship after that.
So when's the second date?
After, well, we didn't go on a second date, but
I am just shocked.
because after all of that, he actually did reciprocate, asking me about my past relationships, but I felt like we had spent over an hour and a bit talking about exes, and I mean his specifically. After he went into such great detail about his two last relationships, it really was over an hour.
That's
I
wild.
didn't even want to share because I was like, dude, you had TMI. Like our entire date is about ex. Like no date should be so focused on an ex relationship. And after that point, I just didn't. And then I didn't. Me, I'm not private, but I was like, I didn't even share anything. And he was like, oh come on, I shared
You were
everything
probably
with
just like
you.
emotionally exhausted after all
I
that.
was. And I felt like this date was just about exes. And I don't like that negative
Yeah.
for the whole time. And so you do have to be cautious. Like if you're sharing too much and then expecting that person to go into their overshare, at that point, if the conversation is all about something that's negative, it is going to just deplete the energy. Like at
Yeah.
that point, I was like, dude, like we're almost done eating and we're just now going to talk about my ex too? Like, is the whole day going to be about exes? Like, that's just not fun.
Yeah, well, I was bad for that when I was younger. Like if I would get on like a negative tangent, I would like talk to a friend and I would just go on and on and on. And I had a lot of like emotional regulation problems when I was younger, but like they, it's certainly if I was like mad or upset about something, I would corner an unfortunate individual, like a friend of mine or something, and then I definitely would like talk it to death. And then I'm sure by the time I'm like, wow, I feel better now. They're like, Jesus Christ. They're just like, okay, get out of my car, right? You know, like, and it's just being young and not knowing better. But I think our getting older, like you should know that that stuff sucks your social battery, and you've got to just, definitely make sure this back and forth. Don't go for your hour, hour and a half, and then go. So what's new with you? And at that point, the person's just like, fucking, let me get out of here.
Especially when it's a negative focus. And I do think it's okay with people you're close with, like when you go into tangents and if it's, I'm not going to care, but like when you're getting to know someone, but you are right. Like nobody wants to talk about, even if your ex isn't negative, nobody wants the entire date to be about an ex or like about
Yeah,
an issue, whatever the issue may be. If it's like, I've gone on dates with people where it's like they haven't had a good experience with work and then the whole thing is about that negative experience. Like, just make sure you're regulating that. Like, exactly. Nobody wants, like, the date is supposed to walk away feeling like, oh, this was a fun night. And
yeah, not
negative
just
things,
emotionally drained.
they're not your counselor. Just
But
remember
I
that.
know I definitely did that a lot when I was young. Like, so I I'm more aware of it now, but it's I just find in general, like just going too deep on any topic is exhausting. So it's nice to have that reciprocation back and forth where if I feel I'm going down a garden path, I'll just cut it off and ask them another question.
To
Because I meet
change
a
the
lot of
topic.
people in like my line of work and stuff. So I'll just we start talking about something problematic, like, oh, this guy at work, he's always dropping the ball or whatever, and then you're like, but I catch myself going down that road because, and this is just for years of like practice, but I think if someone were going into a date and number one, try and make an effort to reciprocate, and number two, just try and be aware of if you're going down that sort of path too far, just try and be like, like try and self-regulate. It's hard because especially if you're not really self-aware, but I would say just something that you could try and keep in the back of your mind is like, is this one-sided? Am I doing all the talking? Am I asking the right questions when they're telling me something? Like I always try to like listen to what someone says and then ask a
Mm-hmm.
question that like sort of solidifies that I understood what they were saying. Because
Yeah, yeah.
sometimes people will say to me, like, and I walked in and who did I see? And I'm like, I don't fucking know. Like I wasn't paying attention at all. Like now there's a Q&A at the end. Like fuck me, right? So like I try to be like engaged now where like I can ask a question like that. And number one, I know it hasn't been answered already in what was said. And two, it's like relevant to what they were telling me. So it just helps me stay like focused on the conversation and then ask like an engaging question after, like, oh, did they end up getting back together or whatever? Like just because this helps you focus on what they're actually saying, not just like waiting for your turn to talk.
Yeah, yeah. There's a difference between listening and understanding, they say.
That's right,
And
yeah, and that's a big thing. Like you want to be able to absorb what the person's telling you, and then it helps to I say ask a question at the end that sort of just like solidifies that you were listening, and you know,
and talking about like negative stuff too, just to go back on that quickly, because there's something I wanted to add to that. Um, you said this a couple podcasts ago, and it just keeps coming up with everything, and it's so smart. I mean, one of the only smart things you said, but
mm-hmm.
um, um, people have to think about how they're perceived, and you see this a lot on dates. Is that it's a very vulnerable thing to be single and put yourself out there and go on
Yeah,
dates and whatnot. And a lot of times people tend to overcompensate. And what they don't realize is as they're overcompensating, you're actually coming off as insecure versus what you're intending to come off as like more established or more confident or more capable or better looking or wanted by the opposite sex or whatever,
yeah, yeah,
or the same sex or whatever you're dating, but like being wanted by other people. And I wanted to share this because in the focus of TMI, a friend of mine recently went on a date with this guy, and I think I brought it up a while ago. Like he wasn't like look standard wise, like they weren't at par. Like she's really beautiful, and he's successful, but not look wise.
shout out to my brother out there.
But I and she was kind enough to overcome it, but you can only overcome so much when you're trying to get to someone and they're doing this TMI thing.
Yeah.
Before they met, he kept like bringing up his ex and like how successful she is and how she still wanted him. And he kind of explained that this very successful establishment was owned by his ex. Like it kind of made you look at him like, oh, he must date like somebody
Yeah.
important. And I'm sorry, but one Google search and she didn't own it. but but he threw that out prior to them meeting. And then but it was really just to kind of say that like I date significant people. So like, and
Yeah.
it
That
came
is
off
like you
really
say, it's a
arrogant.
building yourself up. But it's funny, I think guys are worse for it, but like I hear it. I hear like even
Yeah.
got like this guys are like it's just like locker room bullshit. But like yeah, like you hear people talking, you're like, man, like you don't need to fucking impress me or like sell me on anything, like
You
I don't.
come off arrogant that way.
Yeah, like I don't know. People like
And
seem to want to talk to me about cars, and I'll bump into someone like, oh, I got this like 600 horsepower. I'm like, no, you fucking don't, man. Like, come on, right? Like, but it's like it is an insecurity or something that's there, and I think you need to take that with a pinch of salt when you're first dating. Because
well,
I think
it
it's
doesn't give the intended outcome that they wanted. And it got
right.
worse. It got
Yeah.
worse. So she overlooked it during messages. And to be honest, I don't think I could have, especially when I found out that the girl didn't own it. It came off like, oh my God, he's a liar and he's arrogant and he's insecure. And nobody wants to deal with those
Oh
issues at
yeah.
this
Yeah.
age.
No.
And then it got worse because on the date, because she wasn't really acknowledging it through the messages, on the date, he went on and on and on about like what a piece of shit she was or what an asshole she was, but she was beautiful, but he broke up with her because she's an asshole. Like he wanted to say that this beautiful, successful girl wanted him, but her personality sucked so much that he moved on past it. But all he did is come off as someone who talks shit behind his ex's back, how insecure he is, his
Yeah.
need to, I mean, it was beyond TMI. His need to like be wanted by like beautiful women because that's all he dates. It just came off. All of his intended outcomes were not coming off that way by saying such things.
Yeah. It took me a long time to think how I'm saying something, and in my mind it seems like the thing to say. But if I heard someone else saying that same thing, I would shoot them down. I'd be like, you're just being braggy and sort of overcompensating, and oh, I've got all this money, or I've got I fight all these people, or like guys are very like macho and whatever. And it's like it it sounds good in your head, but if you heard someone else saying it, you'd be like, what an idiot, and
Yeah,
that's
you
kind
would
of
just think, what an asshole.
yeah, and that's where I'm at. I'm like, I don't like talking about fighting with people or money or whatever. Like, we all go through like the house thing. You get a house and you're like, oh, this house, like it's not that great. But I have a lot of friends that can't even get into a house because of the market or whatever. So I always try to like consider like what am I saying, that how's that going to sound coming across the table? Like, is that something I'd want to hear? And so I always try to think about how what I'm saying is coming across, and am I portraying what I think I'm portraying, or am I just coming across like a jackass?
And it's actually true because like I just recently, like I was tagged to some guy online and then he asked me like, where did you grow up? And I said like Vancouver. And then he was like, I was like, where'd you grow up? And he's like, oh, I left Iran like 4 years ago, which, it's true. Like most Persians that grew up in North America don't really, because it's a different culture. Like I'm not going to maybe connect with someone who just moved out here. And then
Yeah.
he followed that before I even said anything, like, but I own two houses and I'm business and I'm super successful. And I was like, you just came off insecure. I
Yeah, you're
wasn't
like
actually judging
I
you.
wasn't looking down at you for coming here from Iran. Like it's not a bad quality.
But he thought I was gonna think he's a fob, so he quickly like said all these other things about himself. And then I was like, well, now you just come off arrogant. Had you
Yeah,
just
yeah.
left it at I just moved here 4 years ago. And it is true. Like I actually sometimes do say them like I don't really connect with people who just moved here because where it is a completely different culture, and they always assume that because I am Persian, I am the
Right,
same culture.
right.
And I sometimes say it just so that they know, like, don't expect me to follow the culture. Like
Yeah,
I
you're not
am going to
traditional.
say I'm not traditional. And that's one of the reasons I say, like, I do sometimes say, like, I don't really connect very well with people who just came because it's a different culture. And sometimes I also say, and can come off wrong and come off arrogant and almost as if I think I'm better than. But
Mhm.
really, it's an insecurity on my end because I think, and I've had this happen where they assume I'm going to be a certain way and I'm
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
And so, and it's actually backfired. Like I've had Persian guys tell me like, oh my God, I've never had a girl talk about sex so openly or talk about dating or, like all these things or like
Yeah.
swear or, and
Well, I
then
imagine it's a fairly reserved culture if you're, I
it,
imagine, I've
it's a
just never
little
been
bit,
there, but
yeah, it is. I mean, it's a little more reserved than I am, at least, from what I've seen. And so I guess out of an insecurity, I ask that and I say it too, because I feel like I've been judged for not following certain traditions.
hmm
And so I may come off arrogant. And so I'm just as guilty as he is when he says, well, I own this, I own that. I'm like, we're both coming off as assholes at this point. Like, like
yeah,
it's just
people,
not
it's just
working
an
out.
insecurity thing. I think in the context of first dates, I think it's just inevitable that people are going to try and pump themselves up a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just
Especially,
something you got to try and be aware of. Like, you don't need to put yourself down, but like just don't feel the need to be braggy because like yourself, like you can. There's any number of people out there that have all kinds of money. There's lots of money, especially down where you're living, or even where I'm living. There's lots of money, so you're not going to impress someone with money. Like it's just not going to be a thing. Like people are going to get to know you for who you are, so don't feel the need to like compensate for anything with just
well,
stuff.
that's another thing. I have a guy friend that I know who always mentions like money on dates, or I can take you here, I can take you there, and he's successful. And I tell him like, "Are you trying to be used for your money?" And he's like, "No." I'm like, "Then why do you say it?" Like when
Yeah,
you're telling me like I could take, he'll like find a really expensive restaurant in LA and be like, "I could take you here." He'll talk to girls like that, and I've got a Porsche and blah blah blah. And if things work out, I can also take you on a vacation. This is before even meeting a girl, and I'm like, "Are you trying to be finding a gold digger?" Because
yeah.
that's the only thing you're setting yourself up for.
That's
And
very unappealing, I think. It's
it
just
is, it is.
not a, I mean,
And
like, it's great to have financial stability and whatever, but you can slide that into the conversation politely, like, oh yeah,
or like she
I
could
bought a
ask,
house here or whatever.
what do you do? Do you own a place? Yeah, I live here. You don't need to go to details, like if he says
Yeah.
like, yeah, I own my place in it, like in a certain like Beverly Hills, well, I'm gonna just know where you live. He's
Yeah, yeah.
successful. But you don't need to say I'll take you. And also like I've had guys do it to me and then I'm like, well, like before I wanted to go on a date with you, but now I just feel like if I say yes, as much as I make gold digging jokes, I'm actually not a gold digger. Well, if I say yes to this situation, now I do come off as a gold digger,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
I
yeah.
maybe was planning on going to dinner, but now that like, if this date works out, and I recently just had a guy actually do this. He's like, if this date works out, and then he like named a couple other places he wants to take me, and I'm like, well, now I feel like I'm like on a test trial,
Yeah.
and you just want to say you're successful and you can't afford to take me to these places, but you put me in a position where I either come off as a gold digger, and I also think you're arrogant.
Yeah.
So I think you really got to think about how you say things. Like if you want to share that you're successful, just saying like, I'm a whatever, whatever at this, I do this for a living. And then
Yeah.
let people fill in the blanks themselves. Like you
That's
don't need
right.
to
Yeah.
overshare.
I think just so many guys though this day and age, like especially with online dating, like you've only got a little bit of time to convince this girl that you're I'm using like, guys and girls in this example just because like this is what you're dealing with, but like you've only
Yeah,
got
yeah,
so much time to convince this girl that you're like worth spending more time with, and some guys don't know
yeah.
how to do it. You know what I mean? They're just like, look at this thing I have or look at this other thing. It's like they don't even know how to get that. It's almost like speed dating. It's like you really only have a limited amount of time to like
It is
get all
true.
your cards on the table, right? So I think some guys
It
just
is true.
panic.
Every message you send, and it is like speed dating because every message you send will decipher whether someone decides to meet with you or not.
Yeah.
And people really do read into it. And that's why this is important, like to go over, like it really determines how a guy says something to me. It really determines whether I'll hang out with him or not.
Yeah.
What he says and how he says it. And myself included, I'm getting judged for it all the time too. Like I could have easily asked that guy, like, when did you move here? And instead of saying like, oh, I moved here, blah blah blah, time ago, putting him in a place where he answers, I own this, because he felt he was being judged. I could have said, oh, just to let you know, I'm not that traditional Persian. Just
Yeah.
a heads up. I could answer like that instead of reflecting back to him, well, actually, I grew up in North America. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
there are ways we can talk to not be perceived that way, but unfortunately, every message you send back and forth is getting, deciphered some fucking way and
I think a lot of this
responding
just
some way.
spills over into every part of life, but it's just so concentrated when you're online dating because
Mm-hmm.
you're going through the same thing over and over again, and people are trying to basically give you their resume, to try and like convince you of whatever, and and sometimes people just kind of stumble trying to like impress you or whatever it might be, convince you that you're, because I think with more so in our society, like I think guys are the ones that are like trying to attract a girl, for the most part. So it's like I feel like girls, generalizing, they don't have to do as much to like impress like a guy or sort of convince a guy of anything, because women, girls are always being hit on for the, obviously I'm generalizing, but like I feel like it's a lot more likely of a girl to go out and be hit on than it is for a guy to go out and be hit on. I would
No,
say.
it's true.
I know there's
Yeah, it's true.
exceptions to that,
No,
but
it's true. Yeah.
I think guys are geared to this, like trying to like
Convince you.
convince you, woo you, whatever you want to call it, like like
Yeah.
whatever you got to do to get a girl's attention, right? And I think that's just how
Yeah.
we're programmed. So I think guys go to the right off the hop, they come out guns blazing, trying to convince you that they are worth your time.
Yeah, no, it's true. And it's true. And you really just got to find that fine line of sharing information versus like TMI. Like,
Right.
like
Yeah.
you can share that you have a certain job without sharing that you have all this money,
Yeah,
and
and
you can
basically you don't want
take
to
a girl
talk.
shopping.
What I liken it to is I feel like some people speak of themselves the way they want other people to speak of them, like when they're not in the room. You know what I mean? And it's like
Oh,
that's not
that's
really your
interesting.
position to say, "Well, I'm such a this and that." Like it's like be those things, but going around saying you are those things completely negates it. you know?
Have you ever had someone like I used to be like this, like I'm just about to open my mouth and tell like one of my girlfriends like, "Oh, you look great in that dress." But when they come out and say, "I look so good in this dress, don't I look amazing?" Then I'm like right there, I'm like, "Well, fuck you. Now I'm not gonna say anything."
Yeah,
Like
and
if you're that arrogant, and they
yeah,
don't even mean it that way. They're just so excited to wear that dress that
yeah,
they'll say like, "Don't I look amazing in this?" And then I always tell like I have a friend that talks like that, and I always tell them like you make me not want to compliment you like as I'm about to, because you talk about yourself the way you want me to say about you, makes
yeah,
me, I'm not a parrot, I'm not going to repeat it. And
yeah,
I then you come off as an asshole. And one time she told me, she's like, "But I really love this dress." I'm like, "Then just say I love this dress and let me say you look amazing in it."
yeah,
Don't
yeah,
say the other way around. Like let people put your pieces together. Don't over explain or mansplain or whatever. Let people
yeah,
figure you out.
yeah,
And I think a really, really important thing is too is like if you feel like someone is going to judge you, so you have to overshare and you have to say how great you are, that person might not be for you. Like if you have to explain that you have all this money, you can take this girl out to this fancy dinner and that you can take this girl shopping, then that's not the girl for you if that's what she's looking for.
yeah, yeah,
So you don't need to put those pieces together. You can just say, like, I'm a VP of this company. And if that girl likes you for who you are, she'll get to know you and then she'll see that you possibly can't take her to buy that dress that she wants. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Not that she should be using you for it. Then you will find out that she's not using you for it because she's getting to know you and putting it together.
Yeah, it's such so so many things that you're saying. Like I think just spills over into everyday life. Just I meet so many people and they all are trying to convince you that they're this or that, and it's like just be as genuine as you can. I think is the takeaway. Just like answer the questions and then be open to a follow up question if they need more information or whatever it is, and then like, oh, if someone says, "Well, I have a kid," and like they don't live with me, of course you're going to be like, "Well, what's that about?" Right? I mean, and it's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, we were living in New York, and then we got divorced, and then my job took me to LA, so now I'm here, but I still love my kid and see my kid as much as I can, but like, but it's a fair question. Like, so if you tell someone you have a child, and I imagine the first or second question is be like, "Do they live with you?" Like, obviously you're divorced or whatever, and if you don't see your kid regularly, I mean, that's the kind of thing that's I think is inevitably going to lead to follow up questions. So I could see someone giving up a bit more information on something like that, than
Yeah.
like a general like a job question. But if you say, "Yeah, I have a daughter, and but she unfortunately like her mom and her live in New York, and I moved this way for work," and you wouldn't have to go into a 40-minute ordeal about it. It'd be just the Coles notes, because that's obviously going to be a follow up question, right? If you have a kid, well, where's the kid, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I
it's
think
tough.
wrap I think wrapping it all up, like I know you love to do that. I
I
think a
do.
big a big
What's your
thing is
point? Land your plane.
I'm landing the plane. I think
You
a
do
big,
that.
big one, which is don't try to say the things you want people to know about. Like, don't, or how did you say it? You
Yeah,
said
like
don't,
don't say the things you want others to say about you. Like it's like you're giving them
exactly.
cue cards of like, I want you to turn around and repeat these things about me. It's like don't say it, just do it. Be the person that you would like people to say you are. Don't just
And
go around saying that you are.
it never goes the way you intend it to. Like, just take my guy friend who
Yeah.
he says like, oh, if this date works out, I could take you to this steakhouse and take you shopping here later on, or maybe we can go to a trip to Paris. His intention is to say I'm successful, but what he really does come off is an arrogant asshole
Yeah.
to the girl, and unless he's attracting someone who's using him for those things, which he doesn't want. So whatever you're saying, intending to come off a certain way, usually doesn't fall that way. So
Yeah.
it's best to just let people figure it out.
Yeah,
um
do the things. Don't just say you're doing the things. Like I think that's the
yeah.
biggest takeaway. Because like, if you're gonna do something nice for someone, just do it. Like you don't have to post about it on fucking Instagram or whatever. Like just
Yeah.
do the nice thing. Be a good person, and
And they'll figure it
eventually
out.
these things, the universe or people around you will figure it out. Yeah, like you don't
Yeah,
just
yeah.
be who you want to be, and then the rest will follow. Don't go around trying to convince anybody of anything.
And when you do, you really come off the wrong way. You come off as an asshole, you come off arrogant, you get used. It's not
Yeah,
worth it.
no,
And I think that a really big golden rule is don't ask things about people that you yourself aren't comfortable answering. I know we
mm,
didn't touch on that yet, but like I just wanted to put that in there. Like, don't be so ballsy to ask someone something that you think is so private to them. Like, maybe they have issues with, they're like, oh, I'm not that close with my dad. If you also aren't that close with your dad and you don't want to share that, then don't go think that you have the right to go ask somebody else that, you know what I mean? So
yeah, yeah.
really make sure that you're asking questions that you yourself are comfortable answering.
I also
um
keep in mind that like if somebody offends you by asking something or doing something, just remember like on an early days in a dating, it's not deliberate. Like people are still learning who you are and what you like and don't like. So if they say something, don't assume the worst. Just assume like, oh, this person doesn't know that I like this or don't like that. I think you got to have some grace with people because they don't know you that well.
exactly, that's true, that's so true.
God, I'm
And
smart.
now another one is, don't harp on the negative situations that you have in your life, and don't
Yeah.
make it the focal point of a date. Like,
That's a
just
big
don't be
thing,
sitting
yeah.
there.
Like, if you see that
It,
you're going down that path, try and check yourself out of that quick, you know?
yeah, yeah, because that person's just gonna think you're a negative person overall. I know with that guy who all he did is talk too much about his ex, and I was like, dude, look, the entire date is about your ex. I didn't want to go on a second date because I didn't really feel like being a counselor, and I didn't feel like having the life drained out of me. So
It's
just
I
make
get
sure.
as someone who has done that to people for years, I get it. Like, it sucks. Like, 'cause I feel it too. Like, after I'm like, man, I just fucking killed that conversation. Like, holy. But it took years for me to learn how to regulate that. So definitely, if you feel yourself going down that negative path, just be like, change the subject. Just even acknowledge it. Like, you know what? I don't want to take a turn to negative town. Like, what's going on with you, right? And I do catch myself doing that now, and I'm like, things are still great. I'm just being having a day, right? But I do make that effort to try and think about what you're saying, and if you're going down that path, try to redirect it. It's something later in the relationship. I'm sure you could talk a bit more back and forth, but on the first little bit, just if you start catching yourself heading that way, try and steer it back to neutral territory.
Yeah, that's true. And that's exactly it. And especially if it's something to do with your past. Like, people should be envisioning a future with you. They don't need to harp on your past. Like, if it's
Yeah.
something you later on, like exactly like you said, like later on, I know that when I really start to date someone, I want to know absolutely everything, It's
Yeah.
exactly it. Like, later on, you can share all your past because now I have enough experience of who you are today to not judge you for who you used to be. But
That's
when I
right.
don't know you and we're on like our first few dates and you tell me something, very negative about your past, or you come off as like, someone who's an asshole from something that isn't who they are today, I'm not going to know that. I don't have
Yeah.
enough experience with you to know that you've evolved past that person. I'm only going to assume that because you brought it up and you're harping on it, that's who you still are. So it's really important. You're right. Like, just give it time, and then you can go into great detail about whatever shitty situation or a shitty thing that you want to share, but give me
Yeah.
enough time to assume who you are today so I can not harp on it and still envision a future with you of who you are today.
And don't overwhelm people with everything that's about you. Like if you're a book, just give them the Coles notes. You don't have to give them every like sort of corner of your whole life up front. Just give them the broad strokes, and then like as you were saying, like you can get to know them and dig deeper into parts that are of interest to you, or whatever it might be. But yeah, it's hard to probably just not tell your whole story up front, and I think that's just what you got to. Anyone would have to. I mean, I haven't fucking dated in forever, but I imagine that's I probably
But
just
you're
went on and on for days about how great I was, and then that was usually my operating fucking system back then. It's just like insecure and like just it's just a lot of shit that people need to work on, and it just takes time. And as you get to know that person, you can tell them, like you can give them constructive feedback and that type of thing as you get to know them. Like you can say, oh, I really like this person, it's going well, except for this and that, but that's something we can work on. Like everyone's going to have things to work on, so I don't write it off over one or two small things. Just know that that's something that you can sort of put a bookmark in and come back to and sort of discuss further later.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Well, perfect. I think we landed the plane.
You did, yeah. It's about fucking time.
Just want to remind people to please follow us on the perfect underscore the letter X. So the perfect underscore X on Instagram, TikTok, on Apple and Spotify. We're just the perfect X, and again the letter X, and to share us so we spread and go
And
viral.
our ICQ number is 735-6214.
You gotta land that joke.
That's a fucking mint joke. ICQ. MySpace, I left that one out too.
Jesus Christ.
What else is there? What was before MySpace? Nothing.
Nothing, and we were dead.
I see. Oh, is that thing called AOL chat rooms?
That was in America. It wasn't for us.
Oh, well, we had the non-union equivalent, I'm sure. All right. I'd love to stay in chat, but you're a total pain in the ass.
I know, right? I'll talk to you next week.
Yep. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.